to wait a few more minutes for the audience to build up. Thank you for your patience.
While we're waiting, how are things going at the school? So how are you guys doing studio this semester?
I think most of the studios are taught remotely, Reggie.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
there are some that are hybrid, and
Yeah.
I may be wrong, but most of them are remote. Yeah.
Okay.
Mine is hybrid, Reggie, and we're doing housing in third year. We started off with doing Gregory Ain House and the Mar Vista development in LA, and they just studied it, and then they built on, the students built 2 ADUs on that, and now we're into like high density, about 80 units on the site. So
Okay.
from houses to housing, from house to houses to housing. So the first assignment was house.
Okay. What?
Houses. And the
Okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for your patience. I was concluding another meeting in another room, as we all are these days. And my apologies. I know we want to start as swiftly as possible. We're still adding up our participants. Byron, remind me, we've admitted everyone at this point? Yes. All right. Well, I'm going to give a welcome and to the group as everyone joins, and then we will introduce Gabrielle and Michelle more formally. They'll introduce all of you, and we'll be off. I can't thank our panelists enough, all of you, for joining us in this important discussion and ongoing discussion. So with your permission, I'd like to continue to invite you back again and again to the school for all the good work that you are doing and all that you can contribute to our progress as a school. With that said, Byron, or Gabrielle, or is it time to begin formally?
Yes, we are live actually.
Okay, that's what I thought. So let us start there. Good afternoon, Fay Jones School community, faculty, students, staff, alumni, friends, and benefactors. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you, our entire community, and those further afield to this afternoon's panel presentation and discussion. This is an important moment for the Fay Jones School on so many levels, as it is an important moment for all of us as we confront and address multiple crises in our society through design. Without making too much further rhetorical flourish, there is, of course, the crisis that is upon us of public health. There is the crisis that is upon us of economic recession. There is the crisis upon us of climate change. But there is very much the crisis of social justice, racism in our society, and the need truly to advance the civil rights struggle that much further than ever before through design education and through the design professions. This fall, as a school, we have attempted as first steps to address that particular discussion, that particular crisis, and that particular need through a series of very focused public lectures. And I hope those of you listening in have been able to join us for those lectures as they progressed through the month of October. Those lectures, as superb as they have been, are in fact a prelude to a set of discussions that begins today and will continue into the spring semester. I'm very pleased to welcome our panelists who you will soon meet, who are all of them alumni of the school who have made their own ways forward into their careers, into the design disciplines, and into design advocates. And we have much to learn from them. As I said earlier this week, the Fay Jones School is at a moment where, in our commitment to building a better world, we need to recognize the essential imperative work that needs to be done in design education and in the design professions to achieve full diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need to change our culture, and this transformation relies on changing the narratives of our design culture, on speaking out, on listening attentively, and engaging with each other in ways that we have not done before. Education begins with listening, listening well, listening with empathy, and listening to learn, and being open. And that is the spirit that joins us here today, first and foremost. As we begin this event, I would like to begin, as we now begin all public events, with one other expression of our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that is a land acknowledgement respecting the Native American communities of Arkansas and the greater region. The indigenous history of the land the University of Arkansas campus sits on goes back to time immemorial. And across that expanse of time, many successive groups have lived here and created sacred legacies in this area. The Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design acknowledges indigenous peoples were forced to leave their ancestral lands, including the Osage, Caddo, and Quapaw nations with ties to Northwest Arkansas. We further recognize that a portion of the Trail of Tears runs through our campus, and that the Cherokee, Choctaw, Muskogee or Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole nations passed through what is now Arkansas during this forced removal. We acknowledge all indigenous teachers, researchers, and all other residents in our community and region today. We seek continuity and connection to the past as we look to the future with increased collaboration with indigenous governments and entities. We say to the citizens of indigenous nations, we see you and we thank you. This acknowledgement is particularly appropriate today as we are in the month of November, which is Native American Heritage Month. With that, I'd like to begin by introducing, or in many ways perhaps reintroducing, all of our community to the school's diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinators. Representing our faculty, Gabrielle Diaz Montemayor. Representing our staff, Michelle Pribernow. And I will pass the virtual microphone to Gabrielle with great thanks, not only to Gabrielle and not only to Michelle, but to the entire Fay Jones School Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group, who have come together over this summer to bring the school this far forward and this forward, and with whom we will be working as the year progresses and the years progress, as you'll soon understand from their perspective. Thank you, Gabrielle. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, our panelists, and thank you to all who are attending for your commitment to this good cause. Gabrielle, please.
Thank you, Dean McKeith. I'm actually going to let Michelle introduce some contextual factors that we have been set up while we're working on this, and then I'll go on with a second part.
Thanks, Gabrielle. So to provide a little bit of context, of the American Institute of Architects, for 94,000 members, just 2,270 are African American. And of these, only 452 are women, according to data from the Directory of African American Architects. And for now, at least, the future doesn't seem to be looking much brighter. Only 5% of students enrolled in architecture programs are African American, according to demographic data compiled by the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards. About 18% of the US population identifies as Hispanic or Latino, while only 10% of landscape architects and 4% of ASLA members do the same. About 14% of the population identifies as African American, but only 3% of landscape architects and just over 1% of ASLA members do. According to the International Interior Design Association, 69% of the 87,000 practitioners in the interior design industry are women, yet female leadership at design firms is only 25%. Additionally, only 36% of newly licensed architects are women and 2% are Black. The Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design recognizes these disparities as significant problems and is committed to changing culture, access, and education in order to have a profession of practitioners that matches the general population. Gabrielle?
Thank you, Michelle. Faculty and staff of our school, we have been at work since the summer, planning, developing, and implementing a series of actions contained in a plan titled Equity by Design, Emergency Action Plan to provide more inclusive, accessible, and diverse design education. This is a dynamic plan as it's constantly updated, and it includes various actions in the areas of faculty and staff, the student experience, recruitment, curriculum, and school-wide efforts organized in a short, mid-range, and long-term timeframes. By August 2023, we expect to achieve a 30% diverse school community, and by year 2030, we expect to, at minimum, appropriately represent and serve Black people of our state, with at least 15.4% of Black students, as is the share of the total population of our state. With this context, I would like now to introduce Jensen Johnson, who's a very recent graduate from our architecture program. Thank you, Jensen. And I'll let you start with the introductions to our panelists.
Okay, so for our first panelist, we have Ngozi Brown. Ngozi Onome Brown is both a licensed architect and an NCIDQ certified interior designer. She is also a lecturer at the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, where she teaches third-year design studio. Brown's expertise includes learning environment design and evidence-based design. Brown is a magna cum laude graduate of Tuskegee University, where she completed her Bachelor of Architecture degree. Brown is also a 4.0 GPA graduate of Concordia University in Portland, Oregon, where she received a Master of Education degree. Brown is certified by the United States Green Building Council as a LEED accredited professional with a specialty in neighborhood development.
Also joining us is Reginald Wright, who has worked in field architecture and construction involving various building types. Reggie has well over a decade of architectural practice experience working under the direction of the legendary architect and general contractor Wally Carradine of Carradine Companies. Reginald broadened his construction experience by working for one of the oldest commercial construction companies in the state of Arkansas, serving as a construction estimator. Most recently, Reggie has spent his career working on city, state, and federal government work. Reggie is currently responsible for construction management for several state and federal government projects, with construction budgets totaling over $300 million. Reggie has a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville.
So next we have Aisha Smith, the daughter of two artists and art professors. Aisha Smith grew up with a passion for art and design. She pursued her interest in interior design at the University of Arkansas and graduated with honors with the Bachelor of Interior Design in 2009. Seeking a comprehensive design perspective, Smith continued her studies at Chicago at the Illinois Institute of Technology, where she received a Master of Architecture in 2014. As a graduate student, Smith was a Gensler Diversity Scholarship finalist, and she was awarded the Alpha Rho Chi Medal, which honors graduating architecture students for their leadership, service, and merit. Aisha Smith has professional experience working as an interior and architectural designer for large award-winning firms in Chicago, including Epstein and HDR. Smith believes that diversity and collaboration are key to the enrichment of interior design and architecture, and she shares her design passion as an ACE Mentor program volunteer.
And our fourth panelist is C.L. Bohannon. Dr. C.L. Bohannon is an associate director of the School of Architecture and Design and associate professor at Virginia Tech. His research focuses on the relationship between community engagement and design education, primarily through design for social and environmental justice. Through his research, Dr. Bohannon works in the landscape context of community, history and identity, social and environmental injustice, and community learning. His research has led to contributions to the theorization and application of community engagement in design education. CL has a Bachelor of Landscape Architecture from the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville, a Master of Landscape Architecture from Virginia Tech, and a PhD in Architecture and Design Research at Virginia Tech. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for being here. Now, Jensen, I'm going to let you get started with the questions.
All right, so the first question for our panelists is, why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important in the design professions?
I would say, why is spice important in a chef's kitchen, right? We've all tasted food that has only been seasoned with salt and pepper. And then we've tasted food that has all kinds of flavors in it. And I think it's important, especially when I like to think about Black specifically, just because the way Black people are received is different, I think, than other cultures in a lot of ways. We are not a new culture to this country. We were here when it was founded. We've been here forever, but for some reason, Blackness is always looked at as like skin color instead of culture. And Black people bring a lot of culture and a different eye and a different perspective. We have a different aesthetic. We have different style. And these things add value to the design community in the same way that they add value to every other thing that African Americans participate in. They add value to, you know, a lot of people focus on things like sports and entertainment, which we do add a lot of value to those. But in general, we just do things differently. And in the same way that I think we should appreciate the way other people do things, I think that African American contributions add flavor and spice and take away the blandness. You know, I mean, we're fortunate enough to live in a country that has a lot of different cultures. And I think it's just, it should be obvious, and it shouldn't be something where it has to be forced. And it's sad that it has to be forced because it really is a value, and it should be understood as a value.
Thank you.
Sure, and I think to echo that, just like how the different disciplines come together to enrich the built environment, having those different perspectives can just make well-rounded designs where you're thinking about the different types of clients you serve. And an example that comes to mind is in Chicago, there's a Chinatown, and there was a project done by another firm that had a rendering, and the project was prominently featured in a neighborhood that had that celebrates a very specific culture. There wasn't anyone of Asian descent visible in the rendering, which struck me as kind of odd. So I think being aware of diversity inclusion, not only as professionals, but once you take that first step and making sure that the profession is diverse, it in turn just kind of reinforces that thinking of who you're working for. It's not just one type of community. It's people who are very, very well may be different from yourself, and that you want to have them reflected in the work that you're doing.
I guess my experience has been, and this is just like a huge soapbox. My experience as a Black woman has been that a lot of times people really don't understand that you have equals in other cultures, that they're not inferior, and that they are your equal, and that or you're superior in some capacity, whether it be a superior designer, a superior, maybe they're superior in their exposure to literature or art or music, and you truly rob yourself. You like anyone that has a box that is all the same, like, and everyone in it is the same, is robbing themselves of significant intellectual, spiritual, emotional, relational maturity. You just can't be as well developed as a human being if you don't experience other cultures, and that has to happen in every capacity. It has to happen in design. It has to happen. If you want to be a complete person and you want a complete society, and you have to understand that you're not doing anyone a favor by that. You're not, except yourself. You are missing out. I mean, I've had to tell myself that when I've had to work with cultures that I really was unfamiliar with, and push myself and learn and draw all these benefits from understanding that this culture has a better way of doing this or that. And so I just feel like it should be super obvious, but because there is this understanding of inferiority, that's this undercurrent of inferiority, that there is a supreme group and then everyone else is lower, that it's like that's a rational idea to understand that you just need all these different perspectives. So
I just like to echo, can you guys hear me? I just like to echo what both of you guys have been saying. And I again, not to just keep going on the same trail, but it is just, I think it's just so wonderful when we can really take the time to understand. I'll just share a story. I remember when I was working in the firm, and a guy invited me to the lake. He says, "Hey, Rich, one of the partners in the firm says, hey, I've got a lake house. We're gonna sneak out. We're gonna leave early one day. We're gonna go to the lake." I had never been to I was the only African-American in this firm. And at first I was like, what? That's not what I do. You know, I'm not interested. But it's still, hey, but the idea of, he was one of the partners and he says, hey, we're going to tip out early. So it sounded exciting. I'm like, hey, I'm cool. Just tell me when we're leaving. But I tell you this, I had such a wonderful time. And that right there as an African-American gave me such an appreciation for understanding when these guys were in the office and talking about going to the lake on the weekend and what they do at the lake and what goes on at the lake. And then I had the opportunity years later to work on a lake house. And so having not had that experience and doing that, you know, when the person would have came to me and said, hey, I need you to help me with some drawings, I would have been just like you guys have been talking about. I would have been very, very limited. And it's just a saying that I always say when we talk about diversity, Black and white, we always have to say it's not what you do and your culture, what you guys do and what I do. It's not wrong, it's just different. And so if we could come to that middle ground and say, hey, let me learn, teach me, why do you guys do this? What your culture, why do you got your churches? For example, African Americans in our synagogues, we're a little bit more vibrant, as I want to say. We're a little bit more vibrant than some other cultures. And so I had a white friend of mine, he says, hey, is all that necessary? Why do you guys do that? And so I'm like, well, why did you guys not do that? Why do you guys sit still? But just having that dialogue and being free with one another to understand our cultures. And that has helped me as I helped another architect work on a church for a predominantly white congregation. Well, having that conversation with him and understanding, hey, it's not wrong, it's different, but this is what they do. And I understand that now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
One of my best friends in the world, and I've been friends with her for 20 years. She's 67 or 68 years old. She's white. She wears a mullet. She lives in Alabama. She drives on a 4-wheel thing on her 40 acres of land. Like, yeah. And this is one of my closest friends on earth. And I mean, they have guns in their house. I mean, everything, like the total Alabama, like we are very, very close. And she went to a funeral with me, just to touch on that. She went to an African-American funeral with me once. one of my friend's mothers had died, and she just came for moral support. And when we left, she was overwhelmed. And she was like, the way that you do funerals, the way that African Americans do funerals, you get it all out. And you just, because, you know, we, you know, fainting and you ever been to one, but this is an old school deep South African American funeral. Like, so by the time the funeral was over, we all went to, you know, we went out to eat, we were laughing and talking, and she was like, it's so funny how you got all of that out, and now it's like a purge, you know, like you feel better. And she was like, you know, at the funerals that my culture normally does, it takes years, like we won't let ourselves feel it and like let it out. And so again, it's just, and there have been so many things her culture has, like things she's done in her culture that have been such a benefit to me that I've learned. So, you know, I agree with you, Reggie. It's just, if you get to know people separately and different groups, you grow as a human being.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to this, I was having a conversation with some of my fifth year students actually on Monday, and we were talking about diversity and inclusion in landscape architecture. And I was making a couple notions to them. You know, diversity within itself, right, should enrich, you know, our educational experience. Us being, I'm speaking as a professor, being at Virginia Tech. And then we should be, you know, also it should provide the space for us to learn about experiences, beliefs, and different perspectives from those that are ourselves, you know, for myself. It also should challenge, I think, stereotyped preconceptions. It should also encourage critical thinking, which sometimes is at a deficit in this country, but we should be promoting that, right? And also, think about the students, in my case, the students in landscape architecture, you should help them learn to communicate effectively with people that are different from themselves, right? How does that happen? We should be doing that in school, which then it should, you know, within itself, diversity can strengthen education. And then also the workplace as they graduate and go off into firms as well. But it also should help, you know, and you move from diversity to inclusion. And I think the inclusion piece is where we really have to be intentional with inclusion, right? So I'm lucky to occupy space within a university where I can do some of this work, right? Where we can be at the forefront of asking critical questions and leading out on research and programming and getting students to work on projects that they might not have thought was actually landscape architecture. I think that's important for us to do that, right? And so it's also important for us to use diversity, equity, and inclusion to get our students to understand the ways in which they live their lives, interact with other people, and how their work can be impactful for society, once while they're on campus, and then when they leave whatever university they're at into the firms, right? So that means we as educators, and this can go to practitioners too, we have to be intentional about our programming, or in this case, the types of projects that we go after, the types of projects that we're actually put into the curriculum. We need to be intentional about faculty and what the faculty makeup is and our staff, right? And we also need to be intentional about who is put into leadership, including students, including staff, including faculty within that. If we're going to move the metrics to be really diverse, to be more equitable, and also to be more inclusive in our practices.
Thank you for all of your answers. That was really insightful. So the next question is, what is or was the role of the university you attended or where you teach in shaping the pre-professional relationship with diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, I somebody better jump in, and not everybody at once. Okay, I'll take it.
I didn't get the question. Sorry.
I'll repeat it. I'll repeat it. What is or was the role of the university you attended or where you teach in shaping your pre-professional relationship with diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I'll try my best to take a stab at this. I graduated, man, it was, I think, gosh, 20 some years ago. And, you know, times were much different. Even, I think it was a good time for me and at the University of Arkansas. But I will say, during my time in at the school, there was not a big emphasis. So in terms of shaping me in terms of diversity, that was kind of something that I had to, being a minority, being one of few African Americans in the school, I kind of had to navigate that world on my own. And so, but I say this, I see the collateral damage that can happen when a school doesn't take that initiative to do such a thing. And I'll say this, share an example. I was working at another office, and me and this older gentleman, at the time I was probably about 32, and he was probably around 65. And so he and I we just could not, it just seems like we just wasn't clicking. And I just could not understand why we just couldn't seem to gel. And one day it dawned on me, and I said, Reggie, I don't think this guy knows how to be. And at that particular time, I was the only African American at this office. And I was like, Reggie, I don't think he understands. He don't know what to do with you. It's not that he doesn't like you. I don't think he's ever worked with an African American. And I just really started thinking, I was just looking at it. I said, well, where he grew up, you know, at the time, I just kind of started doing some math. I said, well, I think when he graduated, our state was still segregated, and he went to the University of Arkansas in the 60s. Well, during that time, there wasn't a lot of African Americans at the university at that time. And I said, it's possible that he went through his entire career on campus never interacting with a African American. And I said, so now he's in this white profession. So he graduates, he graduated during a segregated time. He went to the university when it probably wasn't a lot of African Americans at the university. And now he's graduated and he's been working in this firm. And I said, so he's been shielded. You might be the first African American that he has had to work this close with. You're from a different generation, and you're from a different culture, and that's different for him. And so I just started taking a different approach. And I just started kind of with that being, first I was starting to get angry. And I just took a different approach and just started trying to get to know him, kind of understanding his world. And again, it's not wrong, it's just different. And I tell you this, that guy, I won't say we became best friends, but man, we would have some awesome conversations. And so I go back to saying that I think it's critically important. I think Dr. Bohannon alluded to it. I think it's just critically imperative that the schools on both sides start really making a push for things like what the Faye Jones School of Architecture is now doing. I think it's critically important that we start doing these things.
And I'll say, if you don't do things like this, I remember when I had an opportunity to go to U of A on a free ride, and I picked Tuskegee. Yeah, I took out loans to go to Tuskegee. I was not going to a white school for college because I was not wanting to code switch. So the thing is like architecture is very challenging, and I wanted to only focus on academics. Like I was like, I'm not willing to disadvantage myself by dealing with race and this hard degree. Like I'm only dealing with the degree. I'm sorry. So like, I just knew I couldn't do it. I knew that I would get in disagreements with people. I knew that I would have uncomfortable, and it just for me, because I had been in all AP classes at Central in Little Rock, and I had, the same kind of stuff I just didn't want to deal with. And so for me, I went to an all Black university on purpose, even though I had a free ride offered to me at U of A, because I just didn't want to deal. And that's the thing, Black people, you don't want to, like, it gives you a disadvantage. This white student only has to focus on academics. This Black student has to focus on academics and race issues. So to me, a big focus on that will attract students if they know that they're going to be heard and respected, and that they don't have to code switch, because the thing about having to change your personality in order to go into different settings when you're going to be living there, eating there, learning there, building lifetime relationships there, like it's too much work. It's different when it's at the office for a couple hours a day, but like if I'm moving on, you know, I'm 17 years old, I'm like, it's just too much. So I think it's important that people understand like that side of why some students do pick an HBCU, or they choose not to deal with it, because it's a lot. And so I would just say, as for an African American student, I would say refuse to code switch. I've gotten to the point where I won't do it. Like it's important to like get to know somebody for who you are, like who I am. I need you to know me as this person from this culture. I'm not gonna talk like you. I'm gonna talk like me. I'm gonna behave like me. I'm gonna be about it or whatever. Like this, I'm gonna be, and this is for your benefit. Like you need to learn how to deal with people that communicate differently than you and act differently than you, that like to dress differently than you. That's important. And so I think for me as a 17-year-old, I just didn't have the strength to do that. But I think that times are changing, right? And I think it's important for African Americans to say, I'm not code switching anymore. We've been around long enough for you to know something about our culture. Like watch a movie, read a book. Like, and then on the flip side, like I think it's commendable, and I appreciate the university's very intense and consistent efforts to make sure that you don't feel like an alien on the campus. Because I don't feel like students feel that way anymore. Like I would have felt, 20 something years when I, it was over 20 years ago when I went to college as well. So if students don't respond, if they don't respond to the fact that people want to be themselves, they won't be able to meet the need for students at all.
Man, I'll jump in. I'm just gonna piggyback, and I'm gonna shut up. But I will say one thing, and I'm gonna give Professor Goodstein, if she's still on the line, I'm gonna give her kudos, because it was because of that lady, man. I still today, her thought process has always been different. I mean, she's from New York. I remember when I was one of her first students that broke her in. Yeah, I mean, she's relaxed now. But she just, it was just something about, it just shows you the impact of what can happen when you do get a white professor that even takes an initiative into students, in particular students of African American descent. I don't know if you remember me, Professor Goodstein, me and Ernest Duckery, we were probably just your hardest students. But she just always, took to us no matter what. It seems like she just understood our culture. And I don't know if you remember this, Professor Goodstein, you were the one that took me to New York. And I had never really been outside of Arkansas. And you was like, hey, I'm taking some students to New York, and helped me to get on that trip, and took me all down to Brooklyn, and just, it was because of professors, like white professors like her, that took an active interest. And I wasn't a strong student academically as well, that took that kind of understood me and was patient with me and encouraged me. It was professors like her. So if it would not have been for a person like that to take a young African American, not academically strong student, and encourage him, and it was kind of unspoken, and she just kind of just led me along through the program, just kind of led me along, and that was so helpful to me.
Yeah, my experience as an undergrad at the University of Arkansas was interesting. The first landscape architect I ever met looked like me. My late father, who's also a graduate of the University of Arkansas architecture program, of course, looked like me. It was my dad, right? But so my world of design was African Americans in design, and I grew up in Memphis. It was a culture shock for me to travel 5 hours to go to Arkansas, and I look around, and there was one other person who looked like me. He was in 5th year, and I was in 1st year, and no one else. So my class, it was just me, and I'm looking around like, what is going on? I'm used to being around African Americans and in design, and the goes, you're right. It was tough. It was hard, and from the time I was at University of Arkansas through Virginia Tech twice, I didn't have a professor who looked like me at all. At all. That's problematic. We have to fix that in this country, right? We have to fix that. And so that in itself, that experience led me to want to become a professor. And now I have students, and I teach the one of the freshman courses, and they see me first. A lot of the students in our program at Virginia Tech. And so I didn't have that experience, but I'm glad that I can be that for someone else. And so I think it's time for programs. I'm glad the University of Arkansas is having these discussions and doing things. We're grappling with the same thing at Virginia Tech. And, you know, my challenge is like, what are the universities prepared to do to be sure that we can get students in the pipeline, not only for the profession, but also for educators, right? We have to see ourselves not only in the curriculum, but we need to see ourselves in who's teaching us. And one of the like Reggie, I had Judy Brittenham was that person for me. Retired professor from in landscape architecture. She took me under her wing and said, she told me, you belong here. She said, don't you dare leave. You belong here. And that little bit of motivation, it kept me at the school because I was getting ready. I was looking I was looking at FAMU and everywhere else because I was like, I'm going to get out of here. But you know, she said, you can do it. And that little bit of confidence gave me. And then also talking to my dad, he just told me, what are you complaining about? I was in the school in the, you know, late 60s, you know, of the 70s. He's like, what do you have to complain about? This is 1997. I'll date myself on this. So yeah, I think it's important, but I do think the work has to be constant. We can't, it's not something where it's like a moment in time. It actually has to be a movement, and people have to be serious about it in order for us to make some changes.
Yeah, I think for me, I also went to the U of A for undergrad, originally from Arkansas. But in elementary school and early education, I have not have had many people who look like me. So very often I was, you know, one of a few minorities. So it kind of became the norm. So it's like, okay, that's not at my primary focus because we've already established that. So I think I've just made it a personal goal to challenge myself, even if I really didn't want to, and I was better for it. So I had a college advisor who, you know, really encouraged leaving the state, no matter where you were, to go to college, and really drove that home. But for me, going to the University of Arkansas, just having that advice, I was like, oh, well, am I doing the right thing? But I think by attending, my goal was, okay, obviously do well in school, but then how can I find like-minded people who can encourage and challenge me, who may or may not look like myself? And so I would seek out people different from myself, seek out people like myself, and kind of use that to help me grow. And just taking that with me to Chicago, you know, with IIT, it's on a much larger scale. I think with, you know, Mises Legacy, it brings in people from all over the country and all over the world. So I think that really opened my eyes to, okay, well, now there's many different types of people represented here, and we didn't all have architecture backgrounds. So it was bringing, I could really see the cultures coming in there, but also seeing their approach to architecture. Just like, wow, you know, there are so many ways of doing things, and they're pulling, you know, they're from another country and they're pulling that in to their thought process. And, you know, I could recognize that it was different from me, and some things I agreed with, some that I didn't, but I took that, you know, just kind of that note to, what can I do with this? How can I learn from this? And how maybe can I use that to shape my perspective moving forward?
All right, so the next question is, what is the most, actually I want to switch to the next question because of something that Reggie said regarding Ethel. So have you had a mentor? If so, how did you meet that person and how have they impacted your career?
I'm gonna be quick. I'm not gonna talk that long this time. What I had to do, and this is what I encourage a lot of students, I really did. I almost had to, and I still do this to this day. I've got mentors that are dead people that mentor me, and so I had to kind of find guys that I wanted to emulate and that were examples to me, and begin to study them, begin to keep up with them. And so, I say all that to say is because a lot of times people may say, well, man, I don't have a mentor. And I say, well, what you have to do then, you have to, yeah, you do. Everybody can have a mentor. You have to find somebody that's going down that path, or that's doing what you want to do, or doing what you aspire to be. And that person can become your mentor through the technology that we have now. I mean, so to answer that question, I didn't have a mentor. I got one later in life, and that was Wally Carradine, whom we all know. And Naomi, you worked for him too, and he was your mentor. But before that, I just kind of had to piece things together and kind of piece mentors together. So.
So I have two. I don't know if we can have two, but the first with undergrad is Jennifer Webb. I don't know if she's on this Zoom, but I think she was very instrumental in how I have approached design. I took several of her studios, and I just used those principles and how I develop concept. Covering the basics of just how to do design, and then thinking about sustainability, and providing resources to just help us move forward. With LEED, when it was still fairly new, and just educating us on that, and then we even studied for the test together and sharing those resources, and taking that moving forward. And then when I went to IIT, my instructor there showed me there are many different ways to approach architecture and many ways to be a designer. So it's not just, it's beyond the building. Professor Amanda Williams, she's also an artist in the city of Chicago, featured at the Art Institute, and she has a couple of different projects that explore architecture and how it relates to race. So I definitely encourage you to look her up, and I've just used that to kind of shape the fundamentals of design, but also the possibilities of what we can get from that beyond the build structure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say I've had a couple different, mentors while I was, undergrad. I talked about Judy Bridnam. Karen Hanna was the department chair way back. And Mark Boyer, who's no longer at the university, definitely served as mentors. As a graduate student, Dr. Patrick Miller, who just retired last year from Virginia Tech, was my summer internship advisor, and then come full circle, he was my PhD advisor. So it was quite nice to circle that back. And then I just have mentors. I'm not sure if they know they serve as mentors for me, but Kofi Boone, June Grant, Charles Cross, my partners in crime, they're also mentors. Andrew Chin, who's the associate dean at FAMU. These people I can contact. I watch their work. They inspire me. So yeah, I think, Reggie, I think you're right. I think it's like finding the mentor that you need at that moment in time is important. I don't think one person can serve that role. I think it's a kind of a multi-layered approach to that.
Yeah, I started off, as far as architecture, I met Ron Woods and Wally Carradine. They were business partners. They ran the largest African-American firm in Arkansas, at Wally Carradine, as you've already mentioned. He was my first boss. And I met them when I was 17 and started working at Woods Carradine in the summers. And Wally became like a personal mentor as well. He just had excellent personal character, business sense, everything. Ron and I still have a great relationship and work together all the time. And he is a mentor in a lot of respects. Another good mentor of mine is So when I was younger, I used to, because if you are vocal about what you need, people will look out for you. At least that has been my experience. And when I was younger, I really wanted to do photography, furniture design, and architecture. And I would tell any and every random person I met, I want to do these. Can I do all three of these at the same time? And a family member of mine heard that from me and connected me with an architect. He's actually a fellow named Kuendeche. He's a very, very popular architect. Hopefully he's on here. I don't know if he is or not, but he's FAIA. He does all kinds of work all over the state of Arkansas. And he's a photographer, a furniture designer, and an architect. And he has done work all over the world, actually. His work has been, his art has been published and it's been exhibited all over the world. He has art right now down Main Street and all those other places. But someone introduced me to him, my uncle or my cousin, like a family member. And I was like 18 years old, and I was just starting at Tuskegee, and he was living in I want to get this, I think it was Indonesia, and he would send me postcards of and pictures of the work he was doing in Indonesia when I was 17. That was incredibly motivating. So I think if you see somebody's doing something exciting, know they're probably really busy, know that. And so you might have to be a little bit assertive and push. But a lot of times, even when people are really busy, if they can tell that your heart is really in it, they will invest in you. Now, if you're halfway approaching people that are busy, you're going to fall through the cracks. But because I was very aggressive with Kuendeche, I'm still am. In the same with
you're aggressive with everybody.
Everybody, I'm I need your knowledge and your skills, And the same with my friend, the lady that lives in Alabama that I was talking about. For another reason, I walked up to her when I was 19, and I was like, I need you to be my friend because you have all these skills, and I want to learn these. And I pushed, and I think that's important. That if you see somebody that is shining in the area that you want to shine in, go put yourself out, but make sure that you're serious about it and that you're not wasting their time, because they'll invest in you, and they will, they'll become, me and Kuendeche are friends now. Same for Lane, my friend in Alabama, and Ron. Me and Ron are business partners. So yeah, if you do it, you stick to it, you get those mentors, and it can become something really, really beautiful.
Okay, so we have a little over 30 minutes left, I believe, and we have several questions from our audience. So I'm gonna ask as many as I can and try to just pick around here. How can educational institutions help to fix the high economic barrier to entry that design school has compared to other fields of education?
I can take a shot at that. Try to. I think we need more scholarships, and I think it needs to be substantial money, not $500, where we need things which is great because you can buy some supplies, even though supplies are getting expensive. But we need more substantial commitment to, one, attract students to design. Once they get to university, how can we actually keep them there, monetarily, and then also, yeah, more scholarships that go beyond 1 or 2 years. If this is a 5-year commitment, let's get some scholarships that to really to provide the blanket of security that students need. They have to take care of their part of the bargain with QCA, GPAs, things like that. But let's provide the at least get them in the door, and then how do you keep them there? And then what do you do to support the students once we send them off into the world once they graduate?
I think also it's important for the student that's getting into the university, because I've heard students change their majors and stuff over the cost of their degree. And for me, it's an investment. I'm sorry, but I've seen people who have more money in their car, their car costs more than their 5-year degree did, and they're still paying their loans. And it's I think it's important to see your education as an investment. I know it's very frustrating to take out those loans. I hate, but just be aggressive in seeing it as investment. And I'm not trying to be insensitive to it, but I just think we spend money in a lot of other areas that's not very valuable. And it is attainable. You can get this. I got my loans paid off in 3 years. You can do it. You just have to be really careful, while you're in school, not to waste, and to go, not to live beyond your means, and like, don't use your student loans for stuff that shouldn't be used for, and like, and understand that you're investing in yourself. And when you get out, you'll still have to be frugal for a while to get that stuff paid off. And then you can get the big expensive car and all that stuff. But you have to be careful with it's a 50. I mean, it's not 50-50. I mean, I definitely think there are challenges and it's expensive. But I just think you have to be careful too. And don't, if you're 17, it's hard to talk to a 17-year-old about money, but you have to be really careful with your money when you're young, and and don't take out loans just to be buying stuff, cars and stuff like that. Walk to class, like, make your study models out of cereal boxes, like, keep it cheap as much as you can, and understand that when you get out, you hustle and you pay everything you can against those loans, and you can get it handled.
For me, I think it's more first, it's a two-part thing, I think. First, educating people outside the profession on what is architecture and design, because I still think that not everyone quite knows what that is. I think, I still see movies where architects are working at drafting tables. And, if you tell someone about interior design, they immediately go to HGTV. And even though that's entertaining, it's not quite always an accurate representation of what we do. So I think then if you're going to go to school to do that, it's like, what am I doing here? And I had a college advisor tell me that when I wanted to do interior design, he said, that's a rich man's wife's profession, which I think is a very loaded answer. And maybe I could be offended in many different types of ways, but I still did it because I wanted to understand for myself what design is. And then the second part of that is, particularly for minorities, is there are many different ways to design, and there are many different ways to be successful in what you're doing. And it's not just doctor, lawyer, finance. You can use design as a stepping stone and take many different avenues in order to have an impact on your community. And I think by understanding that, so maybe it will not be discouraged in some aspects where it's, I'm going to pursue architecture. Oh, well, that's hard because it's a lot of math, or like, oh, you can't make any money doing design, you're just fluffing pillows. And I think by first starting with what are we actually doing, then you can get that support and maybe bring more people in from many different backgrounds.
I just jump in and say this, kind of echo some of the things that Dr. Bohannon said. I do think that there do need to be some mechanisms in place, and what that is, I don't know. I just think back to my own self. I come from a family where my father was a shoe shiner and my mother worked in a factory. And so, here's a kid that wants to go to architecture school, and I had to work. I worked at the Harps down at on Garland Street, and then I worked in the fundraising department. But I would remember how, I just say this, that it was a struggle. I would have to leave studio when some kids would go home and take a break and then come back to the studio. Well, when studio would end, I would have to leave the studio and go down to Harps and sack groceries I think I was there from 6 to 9 or 6 to 10. And so again, come back to say, I already wasn't an academically strong student, but now I have to, I have to work to, pay, kind of help my parents. And my dad was sending every dime he had up here to the university, and it still wasn't quite enough. And so that became a real challenge. As I look back at it now, and that's something I really want to try to get to work on before I leave this earth, is trying to see what I can do with my little coins to try to see if I can try to help mitigate some of that. But man, just having, some type of assistance, that, because architecture is different than many professions on campus. There would be so many times where a lot of times, as you guys all know, you don't know what your project is that next semester until you start the semester. Well, I never forget. I don't know if it's third year maybe. Well, we start out and they handing us the program. They said, hey, we're going to go to Mexico. And look, this is where our project is going to be, a project on the Mexico-U.S. border. And we're going to go down there to it. And I'm like, well, man, I just saved up enough money this summer to kind of try to put some savings back to try to make it through. Now we're going off to Mexico, and I could not go because I didn't have the funds to do it. So I had to do, I think I had to do a history assignment or something and so what prevented me from going, it wasn't, it was finances. And so the school didn't have anything in place at that time. Maybe they do now to assist me to be able to go on that trip. Again, going back to that trip with Ethel, if it wouldn't have been for local businessmen, like when Wally Carradine was one of them, that supported me to go on that trip to New York with Ethel, I wouldn't have went. So I do think for students that are coming from situations from very hard economical backgrounds, I think, and I know we can all say scholarships are out there, but there are a lot of scholarships that are out there. But guys, there's just as many applicants as there is scholarships. And so it could be a real hurdle in trying to get an African-American student up here to the campus and setting that student up to succeed while they're on campus. So I do think that we need to have some measures in place to try to help those students.
No, Reggie, that's a good point, because I was at Tuskegee, and at Tuskegee, it's an HBCU. There were a lot of students I worked multiple jobs. I was cleaning houses. I worked at Big Lots.
Mm-hmm.
I did work study. And lots of my peers, that's the thing, it wasn't a unique thing. Like none of us were billionaires, right? And so the whole curriculum, we didn't plan stuff like that. I mean, our design project was in Montgomery, Alabama, 45 minutes from Tuskegee. And that's when we would go for site visits, it would be Birmingham, Montgomery. It would be places where we could get in a car. And even that, we'd have to ride in somebody's car. We didn't all have cars, but it was projects that were accessible to us that we could, and also Alabama in of itself has so much racial history. We could culturally relate to the work we were doing. I mean, and we went to Atlanta. We went to places that related to Blackness and African American culture history, and they were financially accessible. And we still got the work done. So I think that's a good point. Maybe there needs to be alternate routes. Maybe instead of everybody going to Rome, maybe there's some work to be done in the Delta, right? Maybe we can do something here. That's a good point. Good point, Reggie.
Okay, so for the next question, I would like to blend two together. I think that they're very closely related. So, one second. Okay, had to free up my hands. So, as persons, designers of color, Black in my case, in this person's case, do you feel that it's necessary to sell ourselves to have a seat at the metaphorical table? As a budding architect / designer, I feel I can't just be myself. I have to be myself and more to get a seat, while others get invited to the table without having to work as hard. And then the follow-up question that kind of, I think, piggybacks on that is, can you talk more about code switching? What are some examples in the design profession?
Yeah, you do have to sell harder. I mean, you have to sell harder. I see it as an advantage. It depends on your personality, right? Some people really like challenges, okay? And the reason why I say that is because it's more than just about your work. It's about an enriched life. So when you have to be at a certain level in order to compete with somebody that's here, in your heart, you're here, right? And that's satisfying. I'm sorry, it is. It's satisfying to know that I'm very knowledgeable about this. This person might be treated the same way that I'm treated, but I'm I know this like the back of my hand. I have a good understanding of this. I had a great conversation with a girlfriend of mine the other day, and we were talking about, she was working on this project, and the firm that was working on there was like an all-white firm, and they had gotten all this stuff wrong and cost all this money. And I was like, if I ever did that on a project, like that would be the end of my reputation. Like, I can't make those kind of mistakes. And so there's a benefit in a way, because you really hold yourself to this standard where you can be very proud of your work and proud of yourself. It's a lot of pressure, and you do have, and I mean, you probably heard this phrase, you have to be 10 times as good or twice as good. You know, you've heard it's a very common statement in an African-American culture that if you want to compete with whites, you have to be twice as good or 3 times as good. And I think I hate to say it, but I really feel like that's the truth. And I mean, it's frustrating, and then you sound arrogant if you say something like that, but it's true. I mean, there's a reason why you see African Americans getting like 6 PhDs and like 900 master's degrees. Like, they're doing it because it takes that much, you know, just to like level the playing field. But what can you do about it? My thing is, you can be bitter, or you can, I mean, because this is a big problem. This is a macro problem, and we don't deal with the micro. I feel like macro is like policy decisions, running for public office, you know what I'm saying, getting into those big seats. And I think that's doable, and we are doing that. We're making strides in those areas. But on the micro scale, I think it's important for you to not allow it to make you bitter, and also create your own space. Maybe it means you need to have your own firm. Maybe, you know, maybe you need to create your own network. Maybe because sometimes it is incredibly frustrating to be dealing with someone who doesn't have your skill set or your abilities, that gets paid more than you and treated with more respect than you. And every time they need something, they're coming to you for it, right? But they're going to benefit. But you gotta, I mean, it is what it is. You know, you can move to, my brother moved to Japan. My brother is a PhD biochemist, and he was like, I'm tired of it. He moved to Japan. That's why I went to Tuskegee. So, you know, you can do stuff, but you know, if you're going to live in this country with this history and this legacy, you don't have to, I mean, it's a part of the fabric of the United States, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And as for code switching, because I saw that question too, code switching just means like, you have to learn another person's culture and your own. And like, a lot of people do it, but African Americans actually have to assimilate and adopt and like transform. Like, I'm serious, and it's exhausting. You do it all. If you want your A's in school, like you have to be very measured and controlled, and to change the way you speak and interact. And you know, you see like an Italian American being loud and silly, and that's a part of their culture, but you do it and you're ghetto and you're ratchet and you're dangerous. Like, it is like, well, I mean, it's something African Americans in general, especially, like, it depends on where you're from. If you are used to being, if you're raised around a lot of whites, it's not necessarily the case. But if you're raised in like Black culture, and then you operate in white culture, then you have to learn how to code switch, because you're basically going to be very Black in your environment. And then if you want to get anywhere in white environment, you have to adopt that culture too. And when you get to a certain age, you kind of get tired of code switching. Like, it's like, I'm over this. But that's what it is. And there's a poem called "We Wear the Mask." I want to say it's by Dunbar. And it talks a little bit about this. I hope I got that right. But it talks about, and this is old. I mean, this man, what was it, the 20s or something like that when he wrote that poem. We have to switch up, even though we've been here longer than anyway. We've been here. My people go to way back. You know, in America. I'm American, and my family's from here, grandparents and great grandparents. But you have to learn. You have to pretty much learn two cultures and operate. And you have to do it more than Black people have to do it more than anyone else. We have, because every time a Black person slips up one time, it makes a statement about every other Black person in the world, and you can't get. I mean, I'm kind of over it at this point. But like, if you're loud, if you're playful, if you're yourself, like, it's like these statements about your race and your culture. So you have to learn how to be white, I guess, and that's what code switching is. But I will say a lot of people are getting it.
Yeah.
I think this is the year for code switching. Like I think code switching canceled in 2021.
Yeah. Thank you, Noma. That was so good. And I just kind of echo what you were saying. I was telling a good buddy of mine that's white. We were having a conversation, and I heard it from a pastor when he was just describing his church. He says, "I'm bilingual. I speak Black and white." And I said, "That's me." And that's kind of what you were talking about, Nomi. We have to. And so I said, "Well," and I said, "John, I'm bilingual, bro." I said, I'm honest with you." And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Dude, I understand your culture because like Nomi said, I said, I've had to, and I understand my culture." I said, "There's nowhere you can take me that I don't." I said, "You can put me in the upper echelon room, or you could take me down to the bottom of the pit." And so I said, I've had to learn, all of my cultures. I said, so I'm very comfortable. And I said, it's a problem. I said, you see it on both sides. I said, you got whites that are very uncomfortable going in Black environments, and you've got Blacks that are very uncomfortable going in white environments. But those that, like Naomi said, that if you're going to, it's sad that it's like that, but you got to become bilingual, where you got to be fluent in Black and white, and be able to adapt. And every day, I have so many different conversations with my Black friends, with my white friends, because their culture is different. Our culture is different. So every day I'm like a bilingual guy.
Yeah.
In the course of 8, and you're worn out at the end of the day.
And the problem with code switching for Blacks is that we have to act like whiteness is our culture. It's a little different than like being, I totally agree, you are bilingual, but like a person who is from a different culture besides Black, okay, they can go into white culture and pick up those social mores and all that of whiteness. But if they slip up and you see a little bit of their Asianness or Latino, whatever it is, it's cool. Like, oh, we know your last name is whatever, you know what I'm saying? But if a Black person slips up, it's like, oh, I saw a little bit of ghetto. It's like, and you're like, I'm not supposed to see that.
That's true.
Like, why do I have to hide this? Like, I mean, I'm Black. It's super obvious. Why is this? Why is this a negative thing? Why is my culture seen as so demonic and so low that I can't express myself? I have to. It's ignorant. My culture is considered ignorant and backwards. And every time I want to act like myself, it's an expression of my lack of training and culture. It's like, no, you just saw me get a little bit comfortable. I forgot, get back. Let me get back on tight. Get back in your culture. It's that, in that sense, that's the frustrating part about code switching. I don't mind learning other people's cultures, but like, it's just frustrating because almost like you have to hide. You have to almost like hide the fact that you're Black, and you understand your culture and you like your culture, and you're a part of that group of people that they say you're not like everyone. Like, no, I am like them. That is my people. We talk. Yeah, I'm like girls. I'm like Girls Trip. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah. And no, that's what our schools, now bringing it back to the academics, I think that's the thing that our schools have got to do, is to provide that setting where that Black student can just feel comfortable, like, not when I'm walking through these doors, I have to be somebody that I'm not in order to make it through the day in this program. I think that, how we get there, I don't know, but what you're saying, we got to provide that. And like Dr. Bohannon said, well, one thing is we got to start putting people in place that look like us. So a student should at least be able to go to that school. That's going to create some level of comfort when he's got some people that look like him. I've heard of people saying, well, man, we can't find applicants. Man, you can hire, there's nothing wrong with hiring an African-American secretary. What about the person in the business development office? They don't have to always be a professor, but I think a student should be able to walk through the doors and see people that look like them, and that's going to bring a sense of some ease to the situation. That's why I'm so glad now you're with the school. I'm just tickled.
All right. All right. So our next question. I am a non-traditional student, first year landscape architecture. And in high school, the idea of having a career where I could use my creativity was a fantasy. I was told you're crazy to think a paintbrush can be used to make money. What can we do to educate students from all cultures of the possibility of creative careers that are tangible?
Yeah, so my bit of advice for our fellow landscape architects out there is we have to stop being shade-loving species. We have to, the community engagement work is that, right? We have to show that our profession can actually produce some positive change for communities. We have to show up in the places that we're needed. We can't say, oh, that's that's their problem over there. Like, we also have to interrogate our own practices and how complicit design is that has created the conditions in which people live, right? And so if we can acknowledge that, right, first of all, and then two, what are we going to do about it? So part of it is on the shoulders of educational institutions to delve into curriculum and the starting points of how some of the canons of design education, but then also being in places where maybe we are uncomfortable as well. We have to take the risk. There's no way that we should not be in the communities that need us. And creativity, that from that something good can come out of it. And then if you can get paid for that too, that's awesome. So we have to do a better job of explaining. I'm talking about landscape architecture, but design in general. Like, how do you get that to become something that where people may not have heard of it, but then becomes part of a future imaginary that can then become actual reality. That's what I really love that the U of A is doing the design camps, and you're actually going to where the people were, so you go to Little Rock, you go into the Delta, there's one on campus. I went to that camp at when it was at that time only held in Fayetteville, and it's opening the door. So we have to figure out which doors that we need to open. Sometimes we need to create the door to open it, right? And so that's how we have to do a better job of educating the public about what it is we do. It can't just be stuff that sits on the shelf and collect dust. We have to be out in the communities across the state, across the university context to do good work. We as designers are creative people, and I'm still puzzled as to why we can't be creative enough to get to high schools, even get to middle school. We need to catch them before high school to really explain the power of design and how it can actually impact change.
Okay. Scrolling here, give me a second. So how do we deconstruct this dominant narrative?
What do you mean?
So that's the question. But perhaps if I could chime in what I think it might mean, maybe the dominant narrative of Eurocentric architecture, Eurocentric ideals in the built environment, this dominant narrative or the dominant culture. How do we deconstruct that as African-American designers, people of color who are designers, architects?
I worked at I guess it was almost all white firm shortly before I ventured out on my own, and I refused to code switch. Like, I was like, I would pull the furrow, wear the furrow when I felt like it, and things like that. Basically stop, like, for me as a person that is, I guess, in the minority, I hate that word, but I think we need to stop accommodating, not by being militant or aggressive, but just by being ourselves. Stop accommodating the narrative that there is an inferiority that just simply doesn't exist, because it doesn't. I'm like, I'm tired of it. So, like, I think we need to stop accommodating that, and by doing, and how do you do that? By being who you really are, and by not being fearful. And that is putting, you're falling on a sword. You're taking a risk. You're putting yourself out there. But look, we're already in a precarious position, and we have been for the last 400 years. Like, if you get to a point where you say, I am going to be myself and express my opinion. Perfect example, I was going back to that firm situation. There was a time when people were like, we were all like doing a charrette. Everybody was coming up with the same design over and over again, like the same design. Like, this is so I basically just said it, like, you know, the emperor with no clothes thing, like everything that comes out of that school looks the same. And like, when I said that, like right after, and I was basically in saying a comment like that, it kind of elevated the fact that maybe it's good that I come from a different background, because all of y'all are looking at this the same way and you're all coming up with the same solution. And so I think in interjecting your opinion boldly inserting your opinion unapologetically, not you don't have to have, I'm not talking about personality traits. You can be very bold in your person, in the way you like, my brother is totally unlike me, but he's very like, he knows what he knows. And if you say, you know, I see this differently, I'm not going to say that I'm not going to nod my head like the emperor with no clothes. I see something here, and my opinion matters. And so I'm going to say this. Like, we're so quiet when we're the only person in the room, and there's no reason for that. Like, stand up. And so, like, for instance, there was another question about, like, the person was like, why can't I let this firm is like super white and super racist, and like, how can I help them understand that they're super white and super racist? You can say it. Like, like that comment, I'm sorry, that was really unacceptable. I was on a board meeting, I was on a board like email chain the other day, and somebody, they were fighting over this like nonsense that had nothing to do with, I mean, it was like a small issue. And the subject line was, "Our voices matter." And it was an all white group. I was the only Black person in the group. And I wrote back, "That's a very tone deaf subject line. Wow, I'm glad you're happy." Like, because what they were arguing about had nothing to do with what's going on with that phrase, but they took it for their little small issue. And I'm like, I'm calling you out. Like, that's ridiculous. And I remember another time I went to one of my bosses and I was like, why am I getting paid less than this guy who doesn't have this degree or this license or this training? And I was like, I only see one difference between us. Like, you help me out, bro. Help me out. Like, what's going on here? I think call a spade a spade. You don't have to be rude, but you can be honest. You can be honest. And if you lose a job or an opportunity because somebody can't deal with reality, good for you that you don't have to deal with that environment anymore. Like, I think you should call a spade a spade. And I think you don't have to have the intensity or the aggression that I have. This is just my nature, but like, you can say stuff when you're not, you can quietly or reservedly. I have a good friend named Stuart, who's an architect up in Minneapolis, very reserved, but try him. Okay, he will say what he needs to say in his way, but it lets you know my opinion matters, my perspective is equal or superior to yours, and you need to do an about face because you're off. And when somebody makes a comment that's inappropriate, stand up for yourself. We need to stop. We need to stop taking stuff and stand up for ourselves. Don't stand up with the nonsense. Like,
no, I agree with what you said. I just think back to my life. I'm share this is my last story, and I'm taking us out of here with one story. I'm gonna close us out. I never forget, man. I had dropped out, Naomi, of the program. I mean, I was like, I'm out of here. This is because I kind of lived that life, just trying to be what everybody else was doing, and I'm just like, you can't do what other people do. You got to have that confidence about yourself. And I never forget, I had dropped out. I remember going to Murray Smart, who was there at the time. I said, Murray, I'm out of here. Get me into the quickest thing that can help me graduate. He said, well, they got this thing called Architectural Studies Program. I was like, I like it. I can get out of here. So I was doing a little work for George Wittenberg at the time. He was just kind of helping him clean up his office throughout the Christmas holidays. And I think he called back to the school. He was looking for a particular book, and he had called the dean. And I think he had mentioned, hey, I have one of your students helping me over the holidays. And I just remember a pause. I just remember him going, oh, okay, I didn't know that. And I was like, oh man, the dean is telling him I'm out of here. And so I wasn't gonna say anything. So as I was leaving for the day, I'm getting back to this confidence thing. So George called me and he says, and I've got to thank him for doing this. He says, Reggie, what is this I hear about you dropping out of the program? I said, George, I just can't take it up there. Man, they treat me unfair. It's just not for me. And he just sat there and he says, well, I've been around you a little bit. And he says, I think you want to do this from what I've seen and from what you told me, but don't let me talk you into this. He says, but basically he says, you know, you got to be you. You got to go back up to that university and be you. We had a long conversation. I can't tell you everything he said, but it was some funny stuff. But he basically was saying, you can do this. I've seen this in you. And just go back. And he kind of just gave me a plan of action to graduate. Do you, basically. And that gave me so much confidence. Now, mind you, I'm going back to this act. I wasn't like you, Naomi. I wasn't as smart as you. So I'm going back. So now I'm just going to tell you the real confidence, because I was a C student. So a C student ain't got a lot of ground to be trying to be bold and stuff, because the only way down is a D and flunking. So you got to be an A or B student to be having some ground. But I had so much confidence, even being a C student, that I went back to studio and was like, hey, this is me. This is kind of how I do it. And I tell you what, I got my first B in studio from one of the hardest professors, Marlon Blackwell. I got my first B because I had, what happened? I just had a little confidence and said, I'm not going to try to be these other guys. I'm just going to do what I'm good at and just be me and stand on that. And from there on, it's just that confidence was just there.
Well, thank you, Reggie, for sharing that. That's very inspirational. As I'm seeing in the comments. So thank you to all of our panelists. This was a very needed and informative conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Professor Goodstein to take us home.
All right, thank you, Jensen and CL and Aisha and Reggie and Ngozi, and all of our gathered community that has contributed forthrightly and provocatively to this conversation. My thanks come not just as the proper and appropriate accolades that are always offered at the end of a conversation such as this kind, when difficult histories and uncomfortable truths are revealed and unpacked and proven to still be challenging, with plenty more snakes that are ready to jump out of the boxes if we're not careful. But my congratulations come because of the dignity and the care and the measurement with which you have shared feelings, experiences, and knowledge, most important knowledge from your souls. And I say that, remember, as a child of the 60s, who was having these conversations, who, and I was just saying this morning, I sat around my first table of women talking about women's issues. It was a table of 7 whole people, 4 students and 3 faculty, all of whom were adjuncts. And the conversations were hard, but the behaviors were reactive, not proactive. And that for all the frustrations that 50 years of dialogue in the profession has brought to me, and even more time that we have struggled since decisions were made in the Supreme Court, and we thought that decisions were made in federal legislation, and we were really disappointed. For all of those disappointments to be able to come together today and have these conversations with a view towards the future, with knowledge, with vision, is heartening, because it isn't always heartening. It makes it difficult for me to find the right words to tie us together, to move forward. But I know that there is a plan, and that together with Dean McKeith, we want to bring the resources that the school has to the disposal of the community. We want to keep knitting a tight weave among our alumni, our friends, our students, our faculty, to continue the conversation, and most importantly, to make the knowledge base that all of us have had to find by ourselves out and open. What can we look forward to? We will be dedicating efforts to continuing these dialogues very actively as we move into the spring semester. And yes, it is time, albeit end of November, to be thinking about the spring semester. Our alumni and friends can expect to hear from us in the form of a survey, because without data, we don't have as much knowledge as we ought to have. That will be coming forth soon. And with programming, I think we had a wonderful lecture series this fall. Gabriella was involved. The leadership of Professor Brian Holland on the architecture side was involved too. They brought us Leslie Loco, they brought us Michelle Wilkinson, they brought us Mara Henry. And we're going to keep up with that energy. I can't give away everything. We're going to still have a couple of surprises in our baskets, but we're very excited about bringing Pascal Sablon to the school and hosting her exhibition, Say It Loud, something that will be brought to you virtually, of course, as well as hands-on. And we know Selwyn, I have to do a special hello to Selwyn because I've seen him on the chat line, has been intrinsic in those conversations with Dean McKeith and I, and making those important discussions. We appreciate that. I'm delighted to share that our John Williams Distinguished Visiting Professor next spring will be Teddy Cruz, who has done so much important work about borderlands and inclusion in the areas of attainable and affordable housing. And I think the excitement that these moments bring speak to some of the areas that I saw in the chat box. How do you change a curriculum? How do you make change step by step? Because we are designers and we know the challenges that lurk in space, that form what we see, what our expectations are, what our beliefs are, what other people see. So to have the privilege of bringing Ms. Sablon, bringing Teddy Cruz with us, we can internalize the dialogue and try to do what we as educators and designers know how to do, and that is put forth the education, create the knowledge to empower everyone with whom we work. Also in that direction, and also under my particular umbrella, as many of the faculty are already aware, we are redirecting our internal research grants to focus on diversity and inclusion issues, both in research and creative practice and in scholarship of teaching and course development. These are the best things that we can do. We know what our expertise is. I'd love to change the world. I haven't been able to do it in 51 years in the field. But maybe with these conversations, maybe with this knowledge, maybe with the openness, the hope, the care, and the compassion of the people who are on our panel today, the next 50 years, when we vision what those might be, will be different than the last, not to mention the 400 or several thousand, dare we extend it, behind those. As always, it is my particular privilege to bid you good evening, but not without passing the baton one final time so that Dean McKeith can really bring us home at the end of what has been an incredibly productive, inspiring, nearly 2 hours. Dean McKeith.
Thank you, Ethel, and thank you once again, Gabrielle and Michelle, for your leadership, but really through you, thank the entire working group of the school for not only conceiving of this panel, but really for the entire set of recommendations, or shall we call them imperatives. I very much want to continue to thank and appreciate our alumni and our faculty who are represented here on the panel. You are so valuable to who we are as a school, and your voices are so necessary to understanding who we are as a school. I can see already, just from the questions that we've received and from the chat column on this call alone, that this conversation has only just begun. And we will continue it in many, many ways across the spring semester and into the years. Certainly, as long as I am dean, this conversation is ongoing. But there are ways in which you are already advising us to work, and ways in which perhaps with a degree of foresight, which after all is fundamental to design, with a degree of foresight in which we are already working. And as we close this panel in still an open-ended way, I just wanted to indicate to all of you here and everyone still remaining on the Zoom a couple of those ways. It's been noted already that the cost of an education, maybe particularly in design, can be a barrier, and that the essential component in addressing those costs is scholarships. And as already being announced and will continue to be announced, we are moving rapidly to bring into being a range of scholarships that are particularly aimed to really address these issues of inclusion for the school. Two notable ones that are already at work is a scholarship fund set up by Ken and Liz Allen, who have otherwise supported our lecture series this fall. Again, to support students and support the school in the greater cause of diversity and inclusion. These scholarships will be more fully described as we enter into the scholarship application period. And let's be clear, there is a need basis to them, as you have already made clear. Secondly, Marlon and Ati Blackwell have made a commitment to the school of a significant sum, which will be added as the years progress, but which will already be activated in this coming scholarship cycle, again, in the cause of diversity and inclusion for students to come to the school and succeed at the school. And thirdly, coming to the issue, and again, this is all first steps, but coming to the issue which Dr. Bohannon has mentioned and others have mentioned of the need to see yourselves in the faculty. We know that there is work to do, and I am committing a significant portion of initiative funds provided to me by the provost to assist us in the recruitment of an ever more diverse faculty, and not only in the recruitment of that faculty, but in the support for those new faculty members to succeed in their work with us, and also to succeed in their mentorship of students while they are advising our students. There is, in addition to that, an endowment that has been established by alumnus Lanny McIntosh, which will come into being soon, which is directly to be focused on the enhancement of faculty at the Fay Jones School through funding for recruitment, retention, and success of faculty. So I mentioned these just as initial efforts that we're undertaking, hopefully to give us all hope that we can in fact, by identifying our vulnerabilities and being honest about them, we can in fact work on them and become better as a school and as a society overall. Now, the last thing I'd like to mention is something that I've identified before, but I regard this as important as all of what I've just laid out as part of the future of the school, is really recognizing part of its past. And that is to call forward again, at least the name, if not the memory, of someone who has figured clearly in Reggie's life and in Ngozi's life, and by implication, probably in, I would argue, every African-American student's life who has walked into the Fay Jones School. And that is to say, again, that with the consent and agreement of the Carradine family of Little Rock, Arkansas, we will be naming the east entryway of All Walker Hall in honor of our alumnus, now deceased alumnus, Wally Carradine, as the first African-American graduate of the school. And these will be regarded as doors of access and opportunity to study in architecture and design. And together with that naming, just to be clear, this awaits full confirmation, but I expect it to happen through a resolution that we'll be making to the University Board of Trustees in mid-January. But through the naming of those doors, we will also be announcing more formally the Wally Carradine Memorial Scholarship, which will be directed at students in support of their success and their access and opportunity here in the school. In making this outreach to the Carradine family and actually friends and colleagues of Mr. Carradine, those of you who know Wally can only imagine, or don't have to imagine really, just how enthusiastic those colleagues and that family have greeted this suggestion. So this is moving forward, and it's moving forward on the basis of your enthusiasm, your energy, your presence, your contributions, your ideas, and really your, I will say this clearly, demands that the school change. And demands I hear clearly, and just as clearly I hear the stories, because design is a storytelling culture. And there are so many stories that we have to listen to in this school that we perhaps have, and maybe definitely have not listened to deeply enough. But we are listening, and we will continue to listen, and we will continue to learn from this dialogue and this discussion. And it is, again, with deep thanks and gratitude that I recognize all of our panelists this evening for all you have said tonight and all you are doing in your lives and in your work, wherever you are in the world. And I'm so grateful, really, for your contributions here, there, and everywhere. Perhaps that is enough for a Wednesday evening. And I will simply applaud you all in actuality and wish you well and welcome you back again and again into this conversation and many others to come. Gabrielle, Michelle, anything you'd like to say then, really shortly for conclusion?
Nothing but thank you so much.
I echo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Be well. CJ in Blacksburg, Jensen, Little Rock, Aisha, Chicago, right? So please take care. We will talk. Good night.
Bye.